the people. Sahara cover my seas. Sahara.
SAHARA TV, you're welcome back. Still on the transition discourse. This segment is on the topic economics, the economy, Nigeria's economy going forward in the government, in connection with the incoming government of General Muhammadu Buhari. To do us the honor, we have on the line Mr. Henry Boyo, one of Nigeria's finest economic brains. He is an economic analyst and industrialist, and he has graciously accepted to speak with us on this topic. You're welcome to SAHARA TV, Mr. Boyo.
Thank you, Chris. It's a pleasure.
Okay, sir. Let's start by me asking you, what is the state of the Nigerian economy presently?
Confused. Very confused. You will agree that an economy is confused when people do things which are not, how would I say it, which cannot be recognized as sensible, common sense. For example, a government that has continuously over the years, at least 2 decades now, to borrow money it does not need, while telling people they are doing the country a good turn and paying interest of between 10 and 15% on money it does not need to use, at a time that the majority of the larger part of the real sector is also demanding for funds to be able to expand their activities. But here comes a government or a government strategy that deliberately and consciously crowds out the real sector from accessing cheap funds in the market, while the government itself is busy endlessly mopping up excess liquidity at a cost of between 10 and 15 or even 16% annually. It is expected that this obnoxious strategy will cost the Nigerian taxpayer or the Nigerian people close to 600 billion naira in 2015. In an environment where there appears to be a scarcity of funds to the real sector, you must wonder, Kwesi, how something that is endlessly in surplus turns out to be so expensive. How could you have surplus commodity becoming more and more expensive? How can you have excess liquidity that is prevailing, endlessly prevailing, such that government needs to mop it up, and meanwhile, you say there is no money for this real sector, to fund the real sector. So you will agree that it's a very confused environment in which we find ourselves in. Yeah. You will also agree that a situation where you'll find that the exchange rate of the naira, which really is the lifeblood of the economy, is totally unaffected by increases in foreign reserves. But the moment there is a shortfall, a small shortfall in expected crude oil revenue, the naira managers do not hesitate to shoot it down. So you have a lot of, how do I say, contradictions within the system, which make it a very, very difficult economy to operate in.
Interesting. And going off what you just mentioned, crude oil. Is Nigeria a bit over-dependent on crude oil? Nigeria has so much more than crude oil. Crude oil definitely brings in a lot of the country's income. But isn't Nigeria a bit too over-dependent on crude oil?
Whether it is crude oil that you have, whether you have a multiplicity of other revenue sources, the end result is that you will earn some dollars, some export revenue. Some countries have just one major export commodity, and they do very well, thank you. Others have a multiplicity of income sources and still don't do very well. So it's not, the issue is not over dependence on oil revenue. The issue certainly is the process whereby the oil revenue is infused into the economy. This process is totally defective. It is totally, it lacks transparency, and it is responsible for the ever-present scourge, I would call it, of excess liquidity in Nigeria. As you well know, excess liquidity is the main driver of inflation. In other words, too much money chasing too few goods will ultimately lead to a spiral in inflation. So excess liquidity that is constantly present, and I know you must wonder why almost every week or 2 weeks the central bank is busy mopping up excess liquidity at such a high rate, even though they also decry the lack of funds to the real sector. But as I say, excess liquidity is responsible for a high rate of inflation. It's also responsible for the high cost of borrowing. Okay. In other words, because of excess liquidity or so-called surplus cash within the system, the central bank and the economic managers think it is best to reduce the quantum of naira supply in the system so as to forestall or control or modulate inflation. So in other words, excess liquidity or surplus cash in an environment where the real sector does not have any money, enough money to be able to produce and expand the activities, it's responsible for inflation, a situation which means that an 8% rate of inflation annually means that every 4 to 5 years, you lose close to 40% of the purchasing power of each income, of each person's income. This has disastrous consequences for demand, because demand drives the industrial spirit and enterprise.
Okay.
And you will not find most industrialists who are willing to participate or involve themselves in industrial activities. So you find that because of excess liquidity, which has been with us for over 30 years, we have the plague of inflation, we have the plague of high cost of funds, we also have the plague of an exchange rate that defies logic, that does not appreciate when you have reserves, but at the same time quickly depreciates when you lose a little bit of your export revenue. So we have a confused state of affairs.
Okay, sir. So let me ask you, General Buhari, or President-elect Buhari, is just on the threshold of assuming office. What areas do you think he should look at to develop, to support the oil industry so that Nigeria, I hear you saying that the problem really is not overdependence on oil, but definitely Nigeria has more to it than the oil. What other areas would you advise the incoming government to explore more?
You see, this is the mistake a lot of people make, including experts and professors of economics. They will tell you you need to diversify the economy. Excuse me, that may be true, and that most certainly is true. But the reality, of course, is that a diversified economy has to stand on the tripod of interest rate, inflation, and also a fairly strong naira. So, in other words, it's not as if the past governments in the last 20 or 30 years have never had diversification of the economy as an agenda. But you see, you cannot have a table that stands without legs. Then it won't be a table. Diversification as a table requires the tripod of low rate of inflation, so that there could be increasing demand on the part of the consumers. And because increasing demand, as I've told you, will instigate the entrepreneurial spirit to produce and employ people. It would also require that the cost of funds to the real sector also remains at maybe 5 or 6%, not selective bailouts, which tend to distort the systems within the economy. So we're talking now of diversification, which has to be based on the critical universal indices of interest rate inflation. You see, we cannot say we want to be like an eagle or have the qualities of an eagle and yet compare ourselves to the performance of doves who have, in this context, inflation rates of 8, 9, 10, 12, 15%, and we say, but look here, we are doing better than those countries that have inflation rate of 12%. Look here, we are doing better than those countries that are mopping up excess liquidity. Like Ghana, for example, is a country I don't understand very well, but I'm amazed that in spite of all the critical, what you might call intellectuals you have there seems to be no cause for concern for most of them that a country like that is continuously borrowing and mopping up excess liquidity at over 20%, while the cost of funds is in excess of 35%. So what I'm saying, in other words, is that this appears to be a trend, a very poor trend, a negative trend in most countries in Africa. They want to build castles without foundations. The foundations that I'm referring to here are the tripod of low rate of inflation to instigate demand, low cost of funds to stimulate industrial enterprise, and also an exchange rate that is fairly strong to make it possible for industrialists to bring in raw materials which are not available locally for production purposes. But unfortunately, people will tell you all other kinds of stories. Like you said, oh, don't you think we should do this and do that? You can do all kinds of things, but you cannot do them without the foundation or the pillars of, conducive inflation rate, conducive cost of funds, and of course, a stable exchange rate.
Interesting, really interesting. So Nigerians have really high expectations of President-elect Buhari. How much, realistically, how much of a turnaround do you think President Buhari can bring?
You see, the same thing I will repeat again. There's very little Buhari can do unless, of course, it recognizes the legs of the tripod, the three things I've spoken about: inflation, interest rate, and exchange rate. And all three variables are caused directly by the scourge of surplus naira within the system. So does Buhari have the courage to be able to rein in excess liquidity? That we will have to see. But without paying attention, you see, unfortunately, most Nigerians have become beguiled by a false, a false assessment of the performance of our monetary experts in the last 20 years. They come and speak a lot of jargon, and ultimately, you can judge that they have failed, because at the end of the day, in spite of increasing wealth, the people continue to become poorer. For example,
I'm tempted to butt in here because I don't want to lose, the trend of the discussion. With you just mentioning figures that are produced by the government officials that you are not really enthused about. Nigeria, for instance, my actual question, sir, is Nigeria became Africa's biggest economy under President Goodluck Jonathan. That is not something the officials cooked up, is it?
I think you have misquoted me, young man. I did not tell you that the figures are wrong. I'm saying that in spite of all the flowery figures that are being produced, the people continue to get poorer.
But isn't there a connect between the figures and the well-being of the people, though? If those figures are not wrong, then I would assume that it should rather have a positive effect on the people rather than what you describe right now.
Well, this is why I'm trying to tell you that the contradiction between the figures that are being published and the reality is based on the fact that the strategies don't recognize those things that induce inclusive growth. Indeed, in the same manner that you have the kind of figures that you're talking about, you will also find that undisputably, there are also clear statistics on, the degradation of life amongst the poor people in Nigeria. In other words, there is no indication that unemployment is letting up. there is no indication, in spite of the very flowery figures that you have indicated with regards to gross domestic product growth and all that, there's no indication that we're even getting, people are getting a better lifestyle. As I told you, the 18,000 naira minimum wage, which was established about 4 or 5 years ago, could have bought the poor man the equivalent value of what $150 or maybe $200 could buy. Today, 4 or 5 years down the line, as a result of constant inflationary rate, spiral of about 8% annually, and a naira that has continued to defy logic and only know one way of going, that is downwards, you find that the people have become certainly poorer. Certainly, you cannot dispute those realities. So I don't want you to say, Mr. Boyo said the figures, and I'm not saying the figures are wrong.
No, sir, I am not putting words in your mouth at all. I'm just trying to clarify the point.
The figures are true, but I'm saying also, conversely, look at the other figures also, which have not been by Henry Boyo, but also being produced by international agencies, which have indicated that more people are becoming poor in Nigeria, that the rate of unemployment is rising, and that the level of social welfare is pitiable.
Okay, sir. Thank you very much. But before we go, though, let me quote something that I read from an article you wrote, and we will ask you to expatiate on that a bit as we bring the interview to a close. You've said that if Buhari must succeed, I'm quoting you, sir, he must quickly reverse the ratio between capital and recurrent expenditure, such that well over 60% of total annual revenue projections would be dedicated to the enhancement of social infrastructure and human capacity. How does this happen?
Well, first, it's a realistic proposal, but I don't know what you mean by how does this happen.
I'm just trying to ask you to explain in layman terms the link between, you know, the 60% total annual revenue and, you know, your statement that it has to be connected with providing or dedicated to enhancement of social infrastructure.
Yeah. I mean, you are out there in the States, your water works, you turn on your tap, the water runs, you turn on the light turns off, you go downstairs after work, the train comes at the right time, the roads are sometimes also congested, but then you look on the side of justice as well, you can be guaranteed of justice out there. The courts here might take forever. I mean, you can go on and on. I mean, you know, everybody knows about all these things. So at the end of the day, you will appreciate that there is a need for urgent infrastructural enhancement in the areas of education, health, transportation. You know, you can go on and on about the usual things that make life easier for people. But I said clearly that you need to be able to reverse the ratio in favor of capital expenditure, such that capital expenditure would accommodate over 60%. Indeed, Lagos State has been able to achieve that under Fashola. They ultimately, over the years, started having a ratio of 60% capital and 40% recurrent. But in the case of the federal, you will sometimes wonder, because when the finance minister came in, the first thing, or one of the first things she said was that she was going to reverse the ratio between capital expenditure and recurrent expenditure. Surprisingly for most of us, we found that in spite of the fact that you had, what, 60% or 61% recurrent expenditure and 40% capital by the time she came in, as I talk, in the 2015 budget, I think capital expenditure is probably less than 10% of total budget at below 400 billion naira. So understand that those of us here would also like all the good things you enjoy in America. To some extent, you know that this is the result of dedicated governments that allocate resources in a manner that is sensible. The American government does not borrow money it doesn't need, only to hide it under the locker and say we are continuously mopping up excess liquidity.
Okay, sir.
Okay?
Thank you so very much. I'm from Ghana, and I can totally connect with what you are saying. I totally know all the stuff that you are talking about. Thank you so much, Mr. Henry Boyo, a renowned industrialist and an economic analyst. SAHARA TV, there's more coming. Stay tuned.